We are unique expressions of the one mind. We are born with qualities that enhance and expand spirit by means of our individual lives. Within each person is a divine spark waiting to be realized and ignited by our awareness of it. Ernest Holmes states that this is the great I am, without which we could not be. This reveals within us the conscious knowing that we are connected and inspired by universal consciousness. As we go into meditation, I invite you to relax into knowing I am an individual creation of life, born with passion and purpose. My passion blends naturally with my purpose. As you bring your attention gently back to my voice, know that there is only God, nothing but God, eternal, infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing, and everywhere present, available in its entirety at every point, simultaneously. And there's nothing outside of it. It is all-inclusive, and it is all good. It creates only the good, the holy, and the beautiful. And we are each expressions of this divine, unique in infinite forms, yet all part of the same wholeness and oneness, the same heart, the same mind, without exception. And in this wholeness, we express with freedom the freedom that God creates within us and through us. With the passion that comes through is the passion of the divine. As we allow it, it expresses freely, but it's always there. And so today I know that it is expressing in perfect form for each individual ear that hears this, past, present, future, because it's all part of the oneness, and it's radiating through Reverend Natasha and through our beautiful music and technicians and everyone here. So I claim the perfection of the beauty of this day, this moment, this only moment that there is, the now. I speak these words into the law, knowing that it is already true. And I say, thank you, Mother, Father, God. And so it is. Lesley Alexander. Anybody else? Anybody else? No. Okay.
I don't usually talk before my songs, but I wanted to say a little something about this song. This is an original song, actually, that I wrote a number of years ago when I realized I had more questions than answers. And I remember sitting down and writing a list of questions for myself. And then I realized that those are probably questions that other people have for themselves. And so, long story short, I wrote a song about my questions. And actually, I realized there's no answers in this song. It's all questions. That's what it is. How big is your container? How much good can you receive? You can have anything you want as long as you accept it and you believe. How big is your container? Do you have room to grow? Are you living the life you want? Does your cup overflow? Is your container the size of a thimble or as big as the globe? How big is your container? How much joy can you accept? Are you living a life of thanksgiving or a life of regret? How big is your container? much love can you allow? Are you living in the past or the future? Can you be present now? Is your container the size of a thimble or as wide as a cloud? How big is your container? How much good can you receive? You can have anything you want as long as you accept it and you believe. Is your container the size of a thimble or as deep as the sea? How big is your container? How big is your container? How big? How big? How big? Thank you.
Thank you, Lesley.
Thank you.
It's amazing how a song that Lesley wrote a while back, as she said, years ago, is perfectly in alignment with what we're going to talk about today. So I think that's just one more example of the synergy of spirit and alignment that happens when we're really looking at spiritual principles and experience. So thank you, Lesley. We don't confer about these song selections. It's just the inspiration, and it seems like every week there's an amazing connection. So, welcome again. Good morning on this beautiful August summer morning here in San Diego, which at least at the moment didn't seem to be as blisteringly hot. And I know I won't complain too much because after all, we're in San Diego, and as my family who live elsewhere in the country are always very quick to remind me, I have no business ever complaining about the weather. So, recognizing that, we are talking this week about passion and purpose. And as Jody shared with you in her reading and treatment this morning, this month, we are exploring these ideas of passion and purpose. Reverend Jerry last week kind of started out helping us look at what are some of the assumptions and hidden meanings and unexamined motivations that might be underlying our experience of passion and purpose. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about how passion and purpose work together and how spiritual tools can help us connect with our own passion and purpose, and not only connect but grow our ability to really experience them at a really profound and deep level. So I want to start with an image. Now, I want to invite you to just think about the feeling that this image might raise for you, right? Snoopy, one of my favorite characters, always showing us something more about ourselves, I think, than we might always want to see. But in this image, that word, that enthusiasm, we're going to talk more about that, but I just want you to keep that image in mind as we go ahead. Okay. So in our teaching, Science of Mind, a religious science, we affirm that what we call God or first cause or source or divine spirit, any one of these terms, is creative. It expresses itself through us. We are a medium that spirit demonstrates itself as in human form. And because we are expressions of spirit, we also partake in that same creative capability, that same creative power. And we do that through our thought. So our thought creates a kind of mental mold, and the universe responds with an equivalent physical manifestation that is proportional to our thought, right? And Lesley raised a really important dimension of that when she asked about the size of our containers. Is your container the size of a thimble, or is it as deep as the sea? Is it as big as the globe? Is it as big as a cloud? What we experience in our lives, the good we can experience, is proportional to our ability to understand this idea and to expand it as we go. So creativity is not only fundamentally what we are as expressions of this creative entity, this creative being, it is also our purpose. Our entire purpose from the moment we are born is to remember what we are, is to connect with that creative identity and those creative capabilities. And so I'm not just talking about creativity in the sense that we typically think about it, not just writing a symphony or painting a painting or designing an amazing building, although those are all wonderful expressions of creativity. I am talking about creativity in the sense of everything that you experience in life. And sometimes that can be a little bit scary to think that we have so much to do with everything that happens to us in life, because sometimes it feels a little easier to think, well, it's just happening to me. I don't have anything to do with it. But that is not our teaching. Our teaching is that, in fact, we have a lot to do with it. Now, it doesn't mean that everything that happens to us is because of our thinking, because we live in a world with lots of other creative beings. But it does mean that we have a great deal of power over our own experience. We have sovereignty over our own thoughts. Not anybody else's, but yes, certainly over ours. So that experience of creativity, which we are having all the time because we are thinking, living beings, that can spark in us a sense of joy. And that joy is passion. That joy is the energy that fuels our passion. So when we experience passion and purpose together, right, there is an amazing synergy that combines, that can benefit our own lives, but also the universe, our collective experience of life. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this now. So Ernest Holmes says this: you are a spontaneous, self-choosing center in life, in the great drama of being, the great joy of becoming, the certainty of external expansion. A self-choosing center in life. Wow, what does that mean, self-choosing? Well, coming back to this idea of our sovereignty over our thoughts, that is the self-choosing part. Right? As we focus on things, as we focus on our passion, it increases its magnitude. And quantum physics tells us that everything is energy. We are all energetic beings, right? If we could be looking kind of through the quantum lens, we would just see ourselves and each other, right, as just vibrations of energy that have coalesced together. Right? So when we give our observation to anything in life, it changes the dynamics from wave to particle, from energy to matter. That's as much of the physics lesson as you're going to get this morning. But what that means is that we have many choices in what we direct our attention to. And have you ever noticed, I have with myself, that we often kind of just go along with whatever seems to be showing up in front of us. So we go down the rabbit hole of social media, or we're watching or listening to the news, and that fills our mind with certain kinds of images and feelings. and I would argue kind of leads to sometimes a malnourished spirit, right? It's easy to focus on negative things, sad things. You know, the way that these forms of communication work, they're often driven by a sort of perverse attention to the negative, right? Because people get caught up in that. But what we are wanting to propose, or what I am proposing, what we're talking about in our teaching this month, is the idea that we can choose to override that. We can choose to focus our attention on something else. And part of the way that that begins is simply by becoming aware of it. Now, some of you have heard me share that story about happiness or drama, right? Someone who once said to me, do you want happiness or do you want drama in your life? And the reason why they made this comment to me is that this was early in my experience with science of mind, was that I was sharing something that I was kind of worrying and obsessing about. And I grew up in a home with a parent who believed that the best strategy in life was to think about the worst that could happen to you and be prepared for it. So, you know, that was the model that I had. And this person said to me, well, by focusing on the worst that can possibly happen, you are kind of creating the possibility of more of that worst happening, because that is what you are focusing on. So I was kind of startled to discover that completely the opposite of what I had grown up with, right? But okay, I thought I'm willing to explore this, to learn about this. So the phrase that this person had offered me, happiness or drama, I started to think about. So every time I would notice that I was kind of ruminating on something or sort of imagining the worst, I would ask that question in my head. Okay, happiness or drama? I'm going to choose happiness today. So that means I have to think about something else, right? I have to think about something more positive, something that makes me feel joy and not worry and fear. So over time, and this was definitely a practice that took place over time, and that I will also say I still have to remind myself from time to time, because, you know, life happens and it's easy to worry about things. I recently heard a really great quote, sort of one minister quoting another minister. I'll give them all credit here. But it was Reverend Cliff Rubin, who is minister up at CSL Edmonton in Canada. And I'm going to talk about him in a little bit. But he also quoted another very well-known minister in our movement, Barbara Waterhouse, who said, it's not what you do or think first that matters. It's what you think second. Right? We all have a second choice, right? So when you notice that the first choice that you made maybe wasn't the one in your best interest or the one that is going to be most helpful or constructive or beneficial, you can choose again. So we're going to talk about that some more. But I want to offer a couple of stories about the power of this idea of the container and how things can come into expression when you are willing to imagine the best. I met a minister recently who shared a story with me. This person owns a home for independent living seniors, senior women. And this person also works as a hospice chaplain in their community. And I asked her how this came about, that she was telling me about this wonderful home and the residents and how they were able to form this community and seem to be really having a very really wonderful experience kind of as a community in the later years of their life. And when I asked her how this came about, she shared with me that in her job as a hospice chaplain, she would often go visit clients, in their homes. So she had clients who she would visit in independent care homes, and some of them were just really awful. They were dirty, they were run down, there was very little support, people were fearful and kind of hoarded their food and hid in their rooms, and they were so awful she hated to even go in them, but of course she had to because that was part of her job. And she was talking with her husband about this, and he is a handy kind of person, had a job, sort of job repairing things. He was ready to retire, and they had an idea. What if they created an independent care home, created a home that would be the kind of place they would want loved ones to be able to live in? And they were really excited about this idea, but they had one problem. They didn't have the money, right? I mean, they would need money to buy a home, to fix it up, to handle the expenses that would be involved with it. But this person was sharing to me that she prayed about it, and she would just say, okay, God, if this idea, which fills me with passion, is something that should move forward, please bring the means to make this happen. And so it eventually unfolded. One day she received a check. It was an inheritance she had not been expecting, didn't know anything about it, but it was enough to put the down payment on a house. And she called a realtor and explained what she was looking for, and the realtor said, well, I just happened to have picked up a listing. I think it would be perfect for what you're talking about. Would you like to come see it today? And she did, and made an offer the next day, and it all came together. Now, coincidence? We would say not. That is not how we understand the world. But I just want to offer the idea. She held a container. She and her husband came up with an idea. It was an idea beyond what they believed was possible in the moment, right? They could have said, well, we'll never be, it's a great idea, it's wonderful, we'll never be able to afford it, right? But they didn't. They just held the container and had faith that something that was moved by their passion to do something good would come into expression. That feeling, right? They had the cowabunga feeling about it. Okay. Roger Teal, who is another minister in our movement, much beloved, says this: as individualized expressions of spirit, love, intelligence, each of us lives in an infinite ocean of possibility. At any moment, we can open to, receive, and cultivate a transformative idea beyond anything we have ever realized before. Okay, how many people think this sounds great? How many people think it's actually possible for them? Okay, most of you, that's awesome. I will admit, there was certainly a time in my life when I didn't think something like this was possible for me. So this flow of outpouring of passion begins when we allow our thoughts to build momentum around an idea, right? To create a mold around the feeling that we want to have when we're doing something. What it would be like to have a dream realized, right? We've talked just now in this story about things that come together. I'm sure you've noticed, you're thinking about a red car, suddenly you see red cars all around you, right? Or you think about a person that you haven't talked to in a long time, and they call you, right? Those things. So I'm going to briefly share a little piece of my chaplaincy story that some of you also have heard. But just from the standpoint of this idea of something that you think of in creating this container. So as some of you know, my father had Alzheimer's, and towards the end of his life, he was living in a memory care facility, and he was receiving hospice care, and a chaplain who was a part of the hospice that he was receiving services from came to see him. And I found meeting her very moving because she always met my father exactly where he was. She met him as the person that he was. She didn't try to orient him to the day, the place, other people. She was just present with him, which to me was very powerful. For those of you who have had this experience, it's heartbreaking to be present for the kinds of changes that can take place as part of this illness. And she never treated him or saw him as a broken or diminished person, but just fully in his humanity. And I was very inspired by this. And after my father died, I thought, like, wow, wouldn't it be great to do work like that? And so I talked to some people that I knew. I was already a practitioner by that point, but I talked to some ministers and people I knew. Well, what do you have to do to be a chaplain? And of course, the first thing they said was, well, you have to go to ministerial school. Ha! Okay, well, forget about that. There was no way that I could imagine that at that point in my life. I was not going, I mean, it seemed silly to even imagine retraining for some, for a different kind of work. Where would we get the money to pay tuition to go to ministerial school? I mean, I had, kids who were in college. I mean, that just seemed impossible. And so, I didn't do anything about it, but the idea, kept lurking in my mind. I couldn't fully put it away. I was still so inspired by this, that I had this experience that I had or really observed more, but anyway, and I just kept thinking about it, and years went by. I still didn't really think it was possible, but during those years, my container was growing. As I was learning more about our teaching, as I was deepening my practice of this teaching, that container kept growing. And finally one day, 8 years later, my husband says to me, you're still talking about this. But maybe you should just do it. And my container was finally big enough for me to say yes. Right? His support was very important, but it wasn't permission. It was the acknowledgement that now my container was big enough. So sometimes it can take time, right? And the reason I offered the story is to simply say, like all of life, it's a process. So whatever the size of your container is right now doesn't mean you are limited to that for the rest of your life. That is always something that you can be growing, knowing that you can have a greater experience. So I invite you to think, with respect to anything that you are inspired by, that you feel but you haven't stepped into quite yet, what would it be like? What is a richer or deeper joy you could experience around this? How could this get better for you? The more that you can lean into the feeling, right, the more there's energy around that can help move forward. Remember, quantum physics suggests that there is, I should reframe this. Quantum physics affirms that there is a connection to all things, which simply confirms our teaching, right? We were so way ahead of the time, right? Totally true, right? Where energy goes, where attention flows, right? That is our teaching. So, let's see. I don't want to press the light. Let's see. Just remembering, I'm bringing us back here because I want you to keep connecting to your own Cowabunga spirit, whatever that may be. Okay. So, Raymond Barker, another minister of our movement who was a contemporary of Ernest Holmes, says, the clarity of the infinite mind is the clarity of my mind. Therefore, I think with ease of my accomplished goal. It is being created in my mind right now. Right? That is part of what we are affirming when we use a tool like spiritual mind treatment, because we state it as if it is already so. Because we believe that when we make that kind of affirmative statement, that we are speaking into a natural law, a natural spiritual law, that must bring that into our experience. So once we allow these thoughts and feelings to flow, they begin to really show up as inspiration for our purpose, as the passion of our purpose, right? And we can blend what we feel and what we know into action, noticing what we are being called to do. And often, just going back, circling back for a moment, we kind of equate this idea of creativity with something really grandiose, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But the idea that we're going to save the planet, right? Or end world hunger, or bring about peace, which are all very noble aspirations and intentions. And that's all wonderful and to the good. But as Howard Thurman once stated, and Howard Thurman, another teacher in the New Thought movement, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Right? So each of us in our own way, that is our purpose, to come alive, to engage with that creative capability, that creative truth that is the very core of what we are. And sometimes it just boils down to things that are very simple. So coming back to my third and last story of this morning, I want to share with you the story, a brief piece of a story of a minister named Cliff Rubin. Cliff Rubin, as I mentioned, is a senior minister at CSL Edmonton. And you can go to YouTube and see his talks about a recent experience that he had that are really important. And I'm just going to take a break here. So Cliff's story is all about this idea of growing the container at a very physical level. He recently had a life and death health experience. He developed a septic infection, was at home, rushed to the hospital, where he was told that he was very, very seriously ill and might not make it through the next day or two. He had a very significant lung infection, and he was not bringing oxygen into his body properly. And as it happened, he had just started teaching a Zen class about meditation and breathing. And he shares in this talk, and it's actually 2 talks, 2 parts, and very worthwhile to listen to. But the aspect of it that I want to share that he begins with is the idea of his container. So in the moment when doctors are telling him, hey, we just want you to know, you're in a tough situation, and we don't know if we can do anything about it. So they're offering him a pretty small container in that moment. And he said he thought about that. Of course, he was frightened, but he thought about this idea of the container, and he thought about his own choice, or as he puts it, his own sovereignty over his thought. And so over the next several days, he put a lot of focus, not on the outcome, not on praying, I want to be well, I want to be healed, but just really focusing in the moment on what he chose to believe was possible. So when they told him, well, your oxygen sats are terrible, they're at 65, and if they go down to 60, it's lights out, he focused on, my oxygen sats are higher. My oxygen sats are normal. That was the container, and he focused on that. And each sort of step along the way, each piece of this, he focused in the now, not on the outcome farther away, but just on the feeling of now, of the truth of what he wanted and believed was true about his body. Because what we affirm, right, at the very cellular level, because we believe in the perfection of spirit, the spiritual truth of our health is always that we are perfectly healthy from a spiritual standpoint. Now, that may not be expressing itself in our body at any given time, but that is our spiritual truth. So he focused on the spiritual truth of the health of his body. And little by little, over the course of days, he improved. Honestly, as he put it, pretty much to the surprise of everyone at the hospital. So I offer this story because of the power of this idea of the container, but also another piece of it that's really important, which is the practice, right? So it often happens, right? We want to affirm something good, but then we get discouraged, right? That's our humanity. And he makes a point of saying, don't let that stop you. We find the practice and we lose the practice. We find the practice and we lose the practice. And this was the value of that other quote from Dr. Barbara Waterhouse about it's not what you do first, it's what you do second. Because when you notice, oh, I lost my practice, you could give up. Oh, I'm never going to be able to do it. Or you can choose to find it again, to exercise it again. And that is part of, I think, the really important piece of this idea of how we bring together passion and purpose in our lives. It's the other P, persistence or practice, right? We can come up with lots of words to connect to that idea. But I think that that's something really essential. So, let's see. Now I want to credit the wonderful creative artistry of our practitioner, Mava, because these are all images from her garden. And the reason that I wanted to share them with you today is that they embody this idea of what we're talking about a seed, the idea, the inspiration, the call, the container, and the blossoming. That happens when we feed that idea, when we take action. So in our human experience, we take action by making choices to move forward, and plants move forward with, in their process of blossoming, of expression, right, through all taking advantage of the nutrients and resources that are available to them. And of course, it helps if you have a gardener who's watering you. But in fact, we all have gardeners who are available to us. They are available to us as our loved ones, as our friends, as our ministers, as our practitioners. Our gardeners are all around us if we choose to reach out to them. So the tools, and there are others, of course, but these are just some of the tools that we can use to connect with our passion, to engage that creative purpose. We can use meditation, we can use visualization, we can use gratitude, not only for what we have experienced, but in the sense of anticipating, and this connects us back to the way spiritual mind treatment works. When you express gratitude for something that you have claimed you are going to experience in your life, that is further energy moving that into expression. So I'm not saying you have to spend hours every day. I mean, of course you can if you want to, right? But you can spend 5 minutes of meditation. You can spend a few minutes of visualization when you wake up in the morning. When you open your eyes, or even right before you've opened your eyes, what can you choose to be grateful for? What can you choose to affirm that you intend to experience in this day? Not tomorrow or next month or next year, right now. Right? I can choose to experience a sense of joy. I can choose to see the wholeness of every single person I encounter. I can choose to simply smile at everybody I walk by, right? Even if they think I'm a crazy person. Because that is an expression of my wholeness. So, when you go in to use these tools, I just want to invite you to think about some additional questions. What type of energy is vibrating in you today? What am I giving the most of my attention to right now? How can I transform my passion into action? So as we come to the end of our time this morning, I just want to invite you each day to do something that brings you joy, and then take that feeling out and connect with other people. Ask yourself, what are you being inspired to do today? See how you can bring that inspiration into your personal action, but also into your community action. What can you share with your family, your friends, and your neighbors? What can you do together with your community here at home, right? So, holding on to that cowabunga spirit, I want to invite you to join me in an affirmation, okay? So, I'm going to invite everybody to just stand up in a moment. And we'll do it the way we do it here, the 3 times. So we'll say it quietly, we'll say it in a kind of regular voice, and then we will affirm it to the heavens, okay? So, I nurture my passion, I claim my purpose. I nurture my passion, I claim my purpose. I nurture my passion, I claim my purpose. Cowabunga!